Okay, I think we're going to get started. Everybody will take their seats and settle in. Thanks for coming out on this rainy evening. My name is Molly Heinz, and I'm the co-chair of the Design, Research, Rating, and Criticism MA program at SVA. Thank you. And as you can see, we are closing in on the end of the semester and our fall lecture series. I have put the last one in brackets with Mark Hansen because that date might be shifting a little bit. So just stay tuned on that front, and we'll keep you posted. It may be happening a few days later, and it might be bumped to our first lecture of the spring series. Stay tuned. If you were not with us on November 10th and missed our open house, where we talked about the program, I just wanted to give a brief overview of what we do here and how we define design. At the open house, we had faculty, alumni, and current students speaking about their own research and work, and you can see that video of the whole event now on our website online. But I will give you the thumbnail sketch right now, right here, which is that our program is a one-year academic program, 2 semesters, with significant scholarship support available. We do a lot of site visits outside of the department, going all around town, even in inclement weather, as our students will attest. And we have lots of guest lecturers come in. We have many day-to-day assignments, and then the one gigantor assignment of the thesis, which even though it's just a 9-month program, our students still write a thesis. And they are reading all the time. Back to the scholarships for 1 second. In addition to some incoming tuition coverage scholarships, we also give scholarship awards throughout the semester. One of those is the Maria Popova Scholarship for Homecoming to Purpose. And I'm not sure if all of you know Maria Popova. She's a great writer and thinker and has a site called Brain Pickings, and is a friend and patron of our program. And her scholarship is an award of $5,000, and it celebrates the courage and clarity of purpose involved in making a major life change, quitting a job, relocating, dropping out of a program in another field to formally pursue a passion for design, writing, and criticism. So the applicants for the scholarship were asked to write an essay on the topic of homecoming to purpose and submit it to Maria for review. And tonight, I'm happy to announce that our winner is Samira Jain, who comes to us from New Delhi, India. Well done, Samira. Samira wrote a great essay called Connecting Minds, which I think we'll be posting on our website at some point in the near future. So toast Samira after our lecture and Q&A. We have drinks next door. So back to our quick overview. Just a quick list of our current faculty who are all top of their game, stars in their field. You can find out more about them on our website. A little snapshot of the kinds of assignments we do here in terms of cultivating skills we want our MAs to leave with. I highlighted literature review because our MA students have their final deadline for their thesis literature review this evening. So I'm impressed to see so many of them here, actually. So good job, guys. Applying to the program is really fairly straightforward. We need transcripts, a letter of recommendation, a written statement of intent, some writing samples, and a resume. Applicants who send in their materials by the 15th of January get first priority. And much more is available on our website in terms of information and background about the program. So after the lecture, I hope you'll join us over in our studio where you can talk to some of our students and socialize. Before we get there, we will have what I think will be a fascinating talk by Caroline Sinders, who is our speaker for the evening. Caroline is a researcher for IBM Watson, the cognitive computer system with the capacity to learn, in case you haven't heard of IBM Watson, which I'm sure everybody in this room has. Caroline is also an interactive artist, an interaction designer, and and a game designer who is based in Brooklyn. Her current personal work explores user experience and user interface design to stymie harassment and to design consent into system designs and communication design for social networking sites. Her work has been featured in the Contemporary Art Museum of Houston, Style.com, Buzz Magazine, Narratively, The Verge, The Washington Post, and New York Magazine, among other publications. She received her master's degree from New York University's Interactive Telecommunications program, where she focused on human-computer interaction, prototyping, and interactive storytelling. She holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts in Photography and Imaging. And Caroline is also a member of the Co-Liberation Foundation's board, as well as a teacher for the foundation, which promotes the creation of video game titles by women. And we define design quite broadly here, as you have seen, and how one can shape and facilitate communication and civil discourse online through design is a fascinating topic. And that's what Caroline will speak to us about tonight in her talk entitled Between Algorithm and Human Intervention. And following the talk, our own MA candidate and accomplished experienced designer and strategist in her own right, Aida Benedetto, will lead a Q&A with Caroline, including taking some questions from the audience. So let's begin. If you'll first join me in giving a warm welcome to Caroline Sinders.
Researcher, and I guess technically a design researcher at IBM Watson. What that means is that I sit in Watson Design, which is overseen by Phil Goddard of IBM Design, and I sit between design and engineering. So I am often the person that interfaces between Watson Design and its initiatives and our engineers who are actually actively building Watson and new Watson capabilities. So this is my talk, Between Algorithms and Human Intervention. This is probably one of the most accurate ways to describe me would be via my Twitter feed. Right, but who am I? Some background. As you heard, I started my practice in photography, which maybe seems a little unorthodox for a user researcher at a very large technology company, specifically one that's probably over 100 years old. But what I focused on at NYU Tisch Photo was how culture manifested itself in objects in the home. So I grew up in New Orleans, and when I went off to school, Katrina had happened a year before and affected my entire extended family as well as myself and my family. So this was my thesis. It looks like a wireframe kind of, and I actually drew it out the way I saw it on the wall before I even had the content in it yet. This was is the basis of my interaction and user experience design work. When I was 21, I had no idea what user experience design was. And it started from this image that I took in my grandmother's backyard 2 years after Katrina. So she lives in Gulfport, that is the epicenter of the eye of the hurricane, of Hurricane Katrina. So it affected a large part of my family. And it was the basis of my research. I took a lot of anthropology courses around what is culture and how do you define culture. And how do you define culture in a space where there is nothing to sort of represent it? What happens to the home if the home is really just this? Like a house used to stand there. You can see a foundation right here. So what becomes of culture in the home as it disappears? And how does trauma even manifest itself when you have to rebuild when this is what your hometown looks like? So then, I guess fast forward 7 years. This is what I do now for my art. I study online fandoms, communities, internet culture, and online harassment. And my job went from taking pictures to doing something like this. So I work in conversational analytics with chat robots as a user researcher. And I believe that design can facilitate, guide, and disseminate language. And I believe that because that's what I do every day. So I hate these pages in presentations, but I do audits of all these different kinds of companies. And this is software that either is active AI, like Siri, Lewis or Cortana, Amazon Echo, Alexia, or APIs that help you set up chat robots. So I work in structuring conversation and relearning out software. So a company that purchases any of Watson's capabilities can actually implement it on their own. I don't actually set it up. But what that means is that I have to lay out software in a way that someone that wasn't in the room we were having a conversation can understand the way their Watson capability understands conversations, responds to answers, can create connections between questions and answers, and can handle any new questions that their users or clients will be creating for them. And I have to do that through software because I'm not there to sit with someone and say, actually, if you structure it this way, like this is the better way. The layout of the software itself has to lead and facilitate our client doing that completely on their own. So I'm going to break down actually the way in which a chat robot can understand text. So what you see are different intents, actions, actors, and dates. So something as simple as perhaps if you have a smartwatch and say, remind me to feed the baby tomorrow. With machine learning, computers aren't contextualizing the entire sentence as a whole. It's breaking it apart and looking for very specific kinds of information within the sentence itself. So feed the baby, in this case, it's called the intent. We would call it action. Tomorrow is the date, tomorrow at 7 a.m. And then remind me is what's sort of prompting everything. So from this, a computer can see time and date, which would mean something for a calendar, and then adjectives and verbs. And then that is what is sort of being parsed to remind somebody to do. But this even works with weather. If you ask, is it raining in Shanghai? The way that would start to be structured out would be, okay, what is rain? What is Shanghai? And then what was the start of the sentence? Like, is it a question? Is it a statement? What is the intent that the user has to ask the software that? And so I work in actually partitioning out language in that way, and then designing our software to explain to someone that if your user asks, is it raining in Shanghai? These are the different kinds of answers that you can return because it's reading it in this really specific way. Effectively, it's like diagramming grammar, which I was really bad at. But this is also another way. So this is how some natural language processing APIs structure their chat robot interfaces. So this is an example of if you were to download software. This one I think is wit.ai. This is how you would start to build out your conversations and what I call curate them. So as the creator around this language, you have to tag and you have to specify that. Like, here's all the different tags towards weather. So the second anyone mentions sunshine, it will fall into this section, and from there it will be pulling out specific kinds of answers and questions. But there are so many different things like within this that are affected by our language. So we have this thing at Watson called chit chat, which is opening and closing. So how many of you have ever asked Siri something really weird? Like, Siri, will you enslave humanity? Siri will probably have a specific response to you, and that response will be like, I don't understand the question, or no, that's silly. So the no, that's silly to a question of will you enslave humanity is actually called chit chat. It's something that a researcher or a designer in conversational analytics sat down and thought, like, this would be really funny. What are all the different ways someone will ask Siri? How will they try to break Siri? How will they go off script? And all of those need an answer. So someone didn't sit there and think, oh, well, if they ask, will you enslave humanity, we have to have this specific response. They probably sat there and said, for anything that seems really weird, let's create like a class of weird. And then here's different kinds of response. So Siri, will you, and then like enslave maybe gets defined, and Siri's pulling and reading us like what that is. And then, okay, that's silly. So like here's the appropriate silly responses. So no, I would never do that. Or maybe I will and I won't tell you to fall into that. But someone did not sit there and like specifically write out this entire script. And that's what I find to be really fascinating. But there are also things that the system will ask, such as disambiguation or intent. So if you say weather, question mark, well, what's the context of that? Like what do you mean by weather? Are you just trying out that word for size in the interface? Or is there something greater? And that's when disambiguation and intent come into, oh, did you mean X? And the system has to analyze what the word is, weather, and then bring about other different things. And what I find really fascinating about the way like machine learning is used is the way user interface design is actually really brought about into the software. So user interface design is concerned with how users add information to the system and how the system represents information back to the users. And building upon this is even data design. Data design is concerned with how data is represented and stored within the system. And then there's process design, which is concerned with how data moves through the system with and where it's validated, secured, and transformed, and where it flows to, and where it goes to. And this is all actual different design processes in software that Watson considers. The way that language even is partitioned inside the software was a design decision that someone made, and the reflections from the programming into the UI is another design decision. So that's how we end up with AI now being involved in all these different kinds of things, of chat-activated games, of the Internet of Things and wearable devices. The structure of language is actually now a design problem, and now it can have a design solution. And I find that to be just so fascinating. And I find it so fascinating because it's functioning following form, because it's a part of a conversation, it's the evolution of conversation. How many people in this room have spoken to a telephone robot before? How many of you have tried to get around the chat tree of having to select different numbers? Okay. So that's really awesome because you're able to hack that system. It was really flexible and it was really open. And that system itself was designed for that kind of flexibility and that kind of misuse. Whether or not that design decision was intentional, it's there. So we now, as participants in this growing field of AI and chat trees, now know that like hitting 0 is something you can do. And if that was a flaw, it's now a design intention. And one of the reasons I bring that up as I move into social media is I really think of language as data and language as a system. And the way our language, the way we create language in these systems, and we move with language, and the way we actually communicate, it's broken down in very specific ways, and it's broken down as data. We as human users, we add the context to language, but the system doesn't have context. AI doesn't have that. But we're adding that to language. Instead here, it's mainly, we become these data points. My interactions and connections are all part of a greater system that are then looped together, like in social media. And these systems can be networked or decentralized. So one thing that is really driving my research is what is the context for language in these centralized structures, and how does design affect language flow and flow context, and even perhaps conversational opt-in, or even the evolution of conversation. So obviously I very much believe this. And I believe that language is very, very networked. So again, as I mentioned earlier, this is the basis of systems design. So our conversations are in fact just systems. And I think everything is a system. And I see digital language as part of a very, very, very specific kinds of system. And the way AIs understand that. Digital culture and social networks is a digital systems with digital cultural rules and regulations that are led by, partitioned, and defined by the infrastructural design of the greater network itself. If you look at Reddit as its own community, there's a certain language that exists there and certain verbiage and vocabulary, and there are certain rules, and that's shaped by partially the design, but as well as the system or the community that's grown out of it. And there wasn't any pushback, so the community has grown and grown and grown and developed this kind of identity and ecosystem in a place. Systems move and allow for some movement, but they also allow for partitioning and sectioning, and that's when creation of a new kind of culture starts to get created. So this is something from Wikipedia around systems thinking, which I actually find to be incredibly useful. I actually really love looking at Wikipedia for things, but I probably shouldn't mention that in an academic setting. But I'll just read this really quickly. So systems thinking is the process of understanding how those things which may be regarded as systems influence one another within a complete entity or larger system. In nature, systems thinking examples include ecosystems in which various elements such as air, water, movement, plants, and animals work together to survive or perish. In organization, systems consist of people, structures, processes that work together to make an organization healthy or unhealthy. And I see this a lot, I see this being incredibly applicable to social networks and online harassment. Right now, the designs of social networks are allowing for this very unhealthy aspect of communities to really grow and flourish in a way that needs to either be mitigated or really assessed, look at as, is this unhealthy aspect part of our social community? Is it there because it's just there? Or is it there because the system has allowed for this to grow and the system has allowed for this to expand? And what can the system do beyond that? So social media creates communities with new kinds of identities and new kinds of conversations. And I've been conducting interviews for the past year on Usenet, AOL chat rooms, LiveJournal, and Echo, to name a few, to see how social media has evolved, but from the user's perspective. Usenet and AOL chat rooms were these decentralized, smaller boards that each had all these had very specific identities tied to them. They're also at a time and place where the users within those systems were coming from smaller outputs. One of my mentors, Phoenix Perry, I interviewed her around Usenet, and she remarked upon when she remembered Hotmail being invented, and her reaction was, you can have 1,000 email addresses. But that's not really the way email was structured. You used to have one, it was coming from an institution, so it'd be a .edu, or it'd be tied to a place of employment. And even ways to access the internet, it wasn't just at home, oftentimes it wasn't an institutionalized place. So the internet was this really small, really specific demographic of users. And it's grown so much since then. So the fact that it used to be very normal to have only one and it was assigned to you, an email, now we assign ourselves emails and we get to choose the names, the different companies that sponsor and host the email, what our email inbox looks like even, and that wasn't the case when at the beginning of, I guess, social media on the internet. So what does our internet look like now? It's board-based, it's ephemeral, and it's asynchronous. And by that I mean, kind of feels like this. Reddit, as an example, feels really small and communal in some aspects because everything is partitioned by subreddits. There's not like a very major timeline where you can see everything posting at once. Like there's the front page and things get pushed up there, but think about the main interaction of where you'd sit on Reddit. Someone starts a board, they're the moderator, they're in charge, they can allow specific people in, they can handle deleting posts. So there is like this one person actually that is almost like a gatekeeper. And then you can join different subreddits and everything is partitioned into these very particular groupings. And that makes it feel really small, even though it's not a hidden URL. You don't have to necessarily log in to see hidden content. It's all actually out there. It just gives this idea and feeling that you're in a very small community, in a very small ecosystem, which it's not. So this is, I think, one of the best ways to describe different kinds of social media. I'll let that sit there for a second. So the thing about this that I like is that I think it does a very good job of metaphorically really explaining how all of these different social networks are different. But they're all pretty popular, right? Like, we don't see LO up here because it would never make it up here. But one thing I find fascinating is that it's not necessarily grouping what is networked and what is not. So, for example, Google Circles and Facebook are networked social interactions that are conversational around postings but provide more context for users, meaning you should be following me. It's often around friends posting together on someone's wall or in a place. So like I will be the initiator to another person, but it actually appears in a timeline. Twitter's similar in that way, but you don't actually go to Facebook or Google Plus to someone's account just to sort of check out and see what's happening. Oftentimes you are already logged in or primarily logged in. It's hard to find like new users on Facebook. You're not necessarily like going to someone's Facebook URL to see like what they're up to. You would perhaps go to another place, be it Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. But it's very much networked, and everyone is separated by the ways in which they define themselves in a network. So. And it started off that way from its creation of being geared towards school. So I remember when I was allowed to finally be on Facebook, not that I wasn't old enough, but Facebook finally started accepting high school students. Facebook started at Harvard and then expanded to different Ivy Leagues and different Ivy Leagues. And Facebook was in charge of who was allowed to join. It was very much networked in the sense that I was grouped by not only high school, then city, then state. And then when I went to college, I still was grouped in that particular way. So I could search through my friends, not just via like name, but via location or school. Now that doesn't exist, but there's a lot of holdovers in the design and layout of Facebook that allow for that grouping and networking. And it's starting to get muddled as they try to make the system more and more open. So they've added privacy checkpoints. But one thing I I find fascinating is there's now a lot of tailoring that's going on and needed in the extent of user social interactions, but this truly is not the case with Twitter. So what does this have to do with consent? I think a lot. I think this is part of the future of conversation and in essence language. I think that like the way in which we shorten words to fit into Twitter's word count is very, very particular, but one thing that I think a lot about though is just the way of which threading falls apart on Twitter. If you can't continue a long-form conversation, what does that mean for conversations? How long does a debate last? What is it like to have a post go viral or be popular after 2 months after you've written it? That's not the way that we were necessarily taught to engage with our spoken socializing conversation at all. And I focus so much of my research on Twitter just because of this idea that our language is actually data now, and it's changing in a way that we're not used to. If this talk wasn't recorded, probably an hour after here, it'd be really hard to think about particular points I had made, right? Or if I was angry or sad, or if my voice shook, it would be really hard to recount those things. But those are a part of the buildup of our conversation. But if this was just told through tweets, you would hold on to those for a very long period of time. In essence, someone who's not part of this room could go and like something or retweet something a week or two from now, and it could gain like mass popularity. One of the reasons I focus on Twitter is it's in this really fascinating space where it's a mixed identity space. It's both professional and personal, and it's a mixed emotional space because of that. I work in technology, and I would say having a Twitter account is almost as important as having a LinkedIn. I almost kind of can't exist without it. One of the reasons I focus on Twitter is it's been the basis of my ethnographic work. So last year I did a deep ethnographic dive into online gaming harassment and Gamergate. I interviewed around 20 users, all ranging in age, race, gender, and social media reach and usage. I interviewed power users, game developers turned celebrities, and users that had few followers and barely tweeted. And the one thing I learned is that all these users have similar problems that need to be solved in small but radically different ways. And like, let's just unpack that for a second. All different users from different ages, locations, needs even, had similar problems that they wanted to solve in radically different ways. And from that, I came to the conclusion that users really need agency. And from that, I also sort of started to realize as I looked into blocking and muting and the structure of conversation, especially between followers, people that I was following, and non-followers, that Twitter really consents on my behalf. It leans forward for conversation. It wants to amplify conversation. It promotes conversations that you've missed while you've been away. It wants to show you conversations between followers of yours and people you're following. Even people that you block, if you have enough followers in between, that content gets pulled and brought out. So I think that this leaning forward, this consent towards conversation is a holdover from early social media, from wanting to be on Usenet and AOL, because users went online to want to interact. But now users almost have to be online. How many of you have ever tried to log in for a website and you're prompted to use an automatic Twitter login or automatic Facebook? Our social media is leaning forward for us to have them. You almost can't exist without one. And what would happen if you actually wanted to lean back? What if the reason, and I think this is a lot of people online, you exist online not because you want to interact with your, you have to. It's akin to having a phone number at this point. All these different kinds of sites sort of pushing subliminally this design method of automatic logging through Facebook and various kinds of social medias. That's a further emphasis on having one. Another reason to not have one, but a reason to keep having one. It's like, oh, I could not have Facebook, but then you see reminders of it everywhere, like log in with Facebook, verify your identity with Facebook, tie this into your Facebook. So what I think that also does is when you're on that system is it makes going private. Going private is a very public act, and this is something I'm pulling out in my research, that when you are the victim of online harassment and you're in a system that wants to lean forward for communication, you want to lean back. If you're in a moment of extreme duress, which is being harassed, if you go private, it signals to all of your harassers that you've shut down. What does that feel like if you are a victim of online harassment or a victim of any kind of harassment or just feeling victimized. It can feel a lot like a loss. So from here, I spent a lot of time thinking about what does a semi-private space in a public network look like? And is that even possible to design? Is that a conversation we should be having as designers and design researchers in social media? What would it look like if we had to make effectively a girl's bathroom, right, in a bar, in a place that is not denim, but a place that you could actually be public with a few, or semi-private, but with unknown actors coming in and out, but it's still actually heavily filtered and moderated as to who can come in and who can't. What would that look like in design? What would that look like in infrastructural design of programming? How would we even begin to structure that? So this is what leads almost all of my research at this point, which is, can design stymie harassment? And I think that it can. I think you're design thinking UX and UI, but I don't mean lean UX, I mean like giving a damn UX and looking for real problems of toxicity and seeing how it manifests into social interactions and figuring out where in the UI we can flip the power dynamic. What would it look like to give affordances and agency that we have in offline conversations to users online? So this is how I start to design systems that deal with cultural currency. What does design do? How do I even start approaching this? I waste a lot of time on post-it notes, so it's not wasting time. So a lot of my research started to manifest in interface design and change. So if I were to redesign Twitter, I would place a button equally prominent in the navigational bar, right next to where I can go to my profile page to tweet. It would be right here. And it's in view directly, so one step into a new privacy setting. So a lot of this is pulling from user interviews as to what the way people started to define how they wanted to interact and what kind of interactions they wish existed. One thing I will caveat as an interaction designer, you shouldn't listen to everything your users tell you as a direct order. You should listen to it as a need or an influence, but you can shape and change that. So a lot of people requested IP tracking or a limit on, or IP tracking, like a limit on how many Twitter accounts someone could have, and I'm very against that. IP tracking pinpoints your computer and can be used to surveil anyone for any reason. But one thing I did take from that was, your issue or problems are perhaps stemming from a user, once you've blocked them, creating multiple Twitter accounts. And they were like, yes, that's the problem. Like, great. Well, if in a series of days or hours they create that, what if you just limited new accounts? What if you could define what a new account was? Or what if you limited followers, right? Or accounts that had to have a photo? Certain things like that. What if they had to be following one of your friends? What if you could start to create and tailor a system to what your needs and safety are? What if you could create a range? This is where I'm just laying out the way blocked tweets and accounts look like. So users could go through and actually look for the tweets that initiated blocking. One thing I noticed is that users weren't necessarily going to a person's account and blocking them. It was a tweet that was instigating the blocking. So what if you could actually see, for purposes of filing a police report or trying to create a comprehensive research or study into the kinds of harassment you were facing to eventually give to the authorities or just to hold on to? What if you wanted to be able to track the different accounts that were actually, or the different accounts and tweets that were actually harassing you? And the reason I also bring up tweets is that language can be very revealing. The way you misspell a word says a lot about you because it's you, it's part of your digital identity. The cultural colloquialisms you use, I use y'all because I grew up in the American South. Time and date, right? So I live in Eastern Standard Time. I use y'all and I constantly misspell the to be tough. So if I were to be pseudo-anonymous, it'd be actually pretty easy to figure out me, or at least be able to link a series of tweets based off the way I constructed my language as a reoccurring agent of harassment. Let's say I have harassment in this room and I kept changing Twitter profiles. It could be very easy looking at it, actually this is around the same kind of language, and they're using these weird kinds of metaphors, and they're misspelling the same word over and over again. That could be enough to deduce that maybe this is one person. as opposed to a variety of different people. And then again, like this is what maybe block tweets would look like, and then just even ways to like, what if you wanted to see select mentions and have things filtered out for you. And the reason I think that this is possible, not just speculative design or suggestion, is that Twitter can tell me this much information through Twitter analytics about my followers, how often I tweet, and what I do. I don't think it's necessarily a huge leap to be able to ask for safer connections in a safer space. What if users did, or what if Twitter creates something like Friends of Friends? They already know a lot about my followers. Maybe they could look at, my followers' friends, and maybe that's the safety network and bubble I want. Additionally, even getting into Facebook, Facebook changes its privacy policies every couple months. What if when a user clicked on something, or like who can see my stuff, they clicked on friends, it started to show them like this is how many people, if they were a friend, could see this, or were not logged in, or like a friend of a friend. Or like, great, your mom, your friend's mom can see this. I've gotten way too many of my mom's friends commenting on my pro-choice Planned Parenthood status. This leads for a lot of really, really conversations I didn't want to have on Facebook, a platform I rarely use. But a bigger thing I pulled out from my research is what if we, when we are designing, we redefine the personas of social media? What would it look like to be a Black activist in Ferguson who's in high school from St. Louis? How would you redefine Twitter for him or her? How would you redefine Twitter for a computer scientist who's also a rape victim? Like, what if we actually started to look at the different kinds of people that use social media, but actually really focused on the parts that aren't positive, the parts that actually build up our lives? If we can tailor suits, why can't we tailor platforms? And I say this because I really believe in people's right to free speech, and I believe that MRAs have every right to tell me that I'm dumb when I post a feminist statement, but I don't believe that I have to listen. And I believe that platforms should honor that. I believe that I should be able to lean out of a conversation, and that's me consenting to the kinds of conversation I want to have. An open platform isn't necessarily open. It's not necessarily democratic. It actually creates unequal power structures. So what if I could start to tailor what I view as my own personal safety into Twitter? What if I could make the Caroline Sinders version of Twitter? And this all comes from design thinking that I've that has from IBM that's definitely shaped my thoughts. So I guess I'll go into my current work. I make a lot of really specific speculative design work around online harassment, social media, as you've just seen. And from this, I really believe that function influences form. So I've started to think now a lot around how should social media start to handle death? A friend of mine passed away, and before she died, she deleted her Facebook account, but she didn't delete her Twitter or her Instagram account. Her LinkedIn is still up. And when I downloaded Signal, because I kept her phone number as a contact, it popped up. So what does it sort of look like as, again, social media is a massive part of our lives as people start to die? Death is a natural part of life. So what does it look like, or what should it look like if users as users begin to die and are using Facebook? I actually contacted the lead designer from Facebook's memorialization team, so you can create a memorial page. And they added in this new function that is rarely talked about on Facebook, which is the ability of, in the instance of your death, you can tag someone on Facebook to handle your Facebook account in your death. But it's really it's a forethought that's placed in an afterthought. It's almost 3 steps hidden into Facebook. You have to try to find it. It's under privacy checkup, but under account. Then you have to go to the side and scroll down, I think, for security, and then you click there, and then it finally says legacy contact. Legacy contact is in the event of your death. That person can enact your wishes. So my sister got a Facebook message which said, "Don't worry, this is a joke, but it's for a project, but if I die, please delete my Facebook account." And we got a phone call where I'm like, "Yeah, no, I'm playing around with the legacy contact, and you should just delete it anyway," but you can actually have someone on your behalf choose to keep your account open. And some of the design choices they made would be that any posts on your page, it becomes a memorial page, will not be pushed to a timeline. No one will get a reminder of your birthday. or of your death day. But it sits there, and people can post to it and talk, and then the legacy contact can go in and friend people posthumously for you. They want to be able to meet and congregate there. And then other suggestions that Facebook has on this legacy contact page is how to create a closed group in the event of someone's death. You want to create a memorial page. So the way I started to approach this was I diagrammed out what would happen if someone died, and I was interested in is there ever not institutional intervention? Yes, that's Lincoln. And this is what I do at work when I'm bored. So I broke down it into death at home, and then from there, the only time there's not really institutional intervention, though there's a push that there should be, is death at home followed immediately by burial at home. But even still, to get a death certificate, someone has to go and file that, and that's still considered institutional intervention. But if someone dies at home, the ER can be called while they're almost still alive or posthumously, and that is then institutional intervention. And then if you die in an institution, you could die in a hospice, but oftentimes people in hospice actually die at home. A coworker of mine does a lot of work around design and death, so he and I were sort of planning this out. But from a hospice, again, you could go to a hospital center or at home in the hospice. From the hospital, it could be surgery, the ER, or just complications. But I was really sort of curious as around, so how would someone die? And then how would that affect their social media? And I came up with these kind of crazy ideas that maybe we could invent this new kind of lawyer that could actually handle all of your death rights for you. And so I had to further explore this. I got a digital will drawn up where I left my sister all of my social media account information, as well as my cell phone information, why should she keep my cell phone open? But just this idea of in the event of my death, this is what you could do. And if you wanted to create a digital altar, here are different sites you could go to get something made digitally in my steed. And then I went to those websites and started to go through them and see is this the right digital memorialization aspect for me? Could they pull in third-party information from Facebook? So this is just the beginning of a project I'm working on, but I think it will manifest in a series of fake jobs that I see existing, such as maybe a pre-law student that has done a year of compliance around death and is given a national identifying number for different kinds of institutions to then go and say to Con Ed, this person's dead and here's their number. And I approached it from thinking a lot around online harassment. How could someone, per se, in Gamergate, disrupt Zoe Quinn's life? And so a lot of what I started thinking about was what if we could change legislature actually around death to where this new kind of job could exist. So doctors are given national identifying numbers for pharmacies to write prescriptions. So what if there's something similar for this new law student that's just really interested in being a death coordinator? And then sort of moved to this new project I'm doing, which is actually happening Saturday at Baby Castle. It's called Social Media Breakup Coordinator. This is all the post-it notes for it, but effectively I'm acting as a life coach / ad agency coordinator to help different people start to shut down relationships in their lives. So let's say you've had a coworker that's got a little too close for comfort, and you're like, how do I scale back what they can see? I can help you with that. Or your ex-boyfriend's mom still likes your Instagram stuff. What's the best thing around that? I have a solution. So this is just the basis of when I start ideating. It's all post-it notes. So what we see here is work relationship, family, friends, and then romance, and then LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And I picked those because those seem to be primarily the most popular. And then why would someone be friending them on you? What's the point of the social network? What is the interaction that's built on it? And then can they be pushed to each other? So all these post-it notes are around that. I think that's it.
Do you want to join me over here at the
Yes.
Thanks for that. You covered a lot of territory in online conversation. I think one of the first things I was interested in is when we think about harassment, or the way you seem to be defining harassment, it seems to come from the farthest actor. So the assumption that safety is created through only looking at closer connections, whereas if we look at violence more broadly, oftentimes the people that are closest to us have the most opportunity to hurt us, and crime statistics would certainly support that.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you can kind of characterize where harassment sits in terms of, violence in general, and like what slice of that do you actually think your work is addressing?
I would say, I think one of the hardest things about online harassment is stressing that it's as serious as offline harassment or like domestic violence as an example, but also stressing that it's a completely different beast. And the reason I tend to tackle it from the furthest away is actually based off the way that police departments and even the way like US legislation covers harassment and defines harassment, and the way that they have not yet been able to define online harassment. So one of the reasons for that is if let's say you are digitally harassed by someone that you don't know, and let's say like you start to know them, like they become a sustained stalker. If you found out, so it all depends state by state, but if you found out what state they were in where they were initiating harassment, you'd have to go file in that state to then actually start legal action. You could not file in your state. One thing to also keep in mind is California has one of the best, most comprehensive cyber stalking laws, primarily due to Hollywood. I think New York is like a close second or third. But so I've been consulting with Representative Catherine Clark on a bill specifically around swatting. So one of the reasons I've been focusing on online harassment is my mom was swatted back in April, and I actually had to. Swatting is when it's when someone calls the police department and creates a very violent fake crime, specifically a hostage situation, to deploy the SWAT team to someone's house. Yeah. So when I started my research into Gamergate, I think I'd only been researching about 3 months in at this point, and I've been interviewing different main anti-Gamergate people. If some of you aren't familiar, I interviewed Catherine Clark and this anonymous person on Twitter called Secret Gamer Girl, and this other woman, Sarah Nygaard. And oftentimes to build relationships with my interview subjects, because I am a stranger, I would slowly retweet things that they were talking about or comment on things to try to build a bond and also prove like my identity and my safety and my commitment to what I was doing. So I think that that's sort of what initiated the swatting, because I appeared to be, which I am, an anti-Gamergate activist, but at the time I was less of an activist, more of just a general observer. So the reason I bring this up is I had to explain swatting to my mom, and then the police. So the major questions I was receiving were, well, what did you say? And who are they, and why would they do this? And the bigger thing that I took away from that is I don't know. I don't know why they would send a SWAT team to my house, but I don't know who they are. So one of the reasons I've focused on the extreme end of online harassment is the way of which you would even start detective work around figuring out who your harassers are offline actually just doesn't work online. Like you can't work that way. You can't work that way. You can't work backwards. So one of the reasons I thought a lot about consent is if users could still be public, semi-public, and accessible, but only to like certain networks, that actually does create safety. It's not valuable, or it's not infallible, it's not perfect, but it starts to create an area where you can create safer spaces. So that's the reason I started there. It's really hard with online harassment unless you have a sustained stalker to begin to figure out who it's coming from and where it's coming from. I just went through this amazing book called The Smart Girl's Guide to Privacy, which has some really good aspects of this. There's like a lot of other things if we were to focus solely on online harassment that I would suggest. But I took it from this aspect because I just noticed in the people that I was interviewing just a lot of fear around like how public or private can I be or should I be? And one thing I noticed is that just Twitter in specific seemed designed perfectly for harassment because it's designed to amplify, to like lean forward for conversation. But that creates like imbalances in power and like unsafe spaces.
So if you were going to design the perfect online system for harassment, what other characteristics would it have?
Upvoting and downvoting.
So amplification of conversation and upvoting and
downvoting
downvoting
of content. So,
like Reddit.
Like Reddit. So at Reddit, I think the upvoting, downvoting allows for a hegemony and allows for a more singular, sustained identity, because you're allowing people with the most voices and the most time to organize, who are also used to being heard, to then organize around different concepts that they like. So one thing I left out of the presentation that I probably should have started with is we all bring our privilege into whatever space we're in, meaning we also bring in our lack of privilege. So think about if you're ever cornered in a Twitter debate, what are the emotional reasons you leave the fight? And I know I tell myself personally, it's time, or like I have to go do something. But a lot of it is like I've recognized the futility of arguing with someone that's used to being told that they're right, or the futility of arguing with someone that's so set in their ways. But what happens if the person that's arguing actually very much believes that they're right, and they're used to being told that they're right, and they're used to being told through systems as well that their voice should be heard and can be heard. And what you then create is a very specific kind of user, and then the users who are the recipient of that, who are used to facing violence offline, who live fraught lives, like women of color specifically, what you then have is an immediate emotional negotiation one has to do between prominence of voice or loudness or safety. And in that kind of negotiation, safety will usually win out. So that's one of the reasons I would say like upvoting, is it sort of then shows like, oh, your actual voice doesn't get to exist here.
Has your research into conversation through algorithms and robots changed the way you converse with people in real life?
Yeah. But only when it's people I don't know, and when I'm in places like a restaurant or a cab, of me being I'll now catch myself being like, you weren't specific, Caroline. That was ambiguous. You're being nebulous to someone. So yeah, it's like if I'm like placing an order, I'll be like, okay, when I order coffee now, it's absurd. I used to be able to drink black coffee, and now I can't due to like tummy issues. But when I order stuff, I'll be like, all right, I want it 2/3 of the way full with coffee, 1/3 almond milk, actually like this much coffee in the small cup.
So you're basically looking at anybody in a service role as if they were a robot.
I try not to, but it's sort of. Well, I mean, so there's actually, I just applied for a fellowship around the way in which users interacting with AI can sort of create unequal power systems in the service industry as well as e-commerce. So like if you know something is non-human, are you more frustrating or abusive to it? Does that carry over into e-commerce specifically, where we have a lot of chat AI, but there's still people there? So it's more in the sense that like service industry roles, especially in New York, like if you're getting coffee, can be really high intensity, high tension. There's usually a long line, a lot of orders, a lot of things being really loud. And I'm like, oh, if I'm just hyper specific, I mean, even if the order is wrong, it's not a big deal. I'm like, oh, if I'm hyper specific, then then there's a higher statistical probability that my order will be correct.
So it sounds like the robots have programmed you towards accuracy over connection.
Usually people laugh because I usually always crack a joke where I'm like, I'm going to be that horrible Starbucks customer, and I don't go to Starbucks, and everyone usually giggles, and I'm like, I have tummy problems. They're like, oh, that sucks. I'm like, can you please just do it like this for me? Or I can pour it myself because I feel bad. So that's usually how it starts off. So I found me having to sort of be like, this is my really specific order, and I'm embarrassed by it. Actually creates now whenever, like it's created more connection just whenever I go to my coffee shop near work. They're like, we know what you want, Caroline. I'm like, I bet you do. I bet you do.
Yeah, the robots don't care if you're embarrassed, but the
No.
folks at Starbucks do. So
Yeah.
There's something comforting in that, I guess.
There's something really wonderful about that.
Let's see. Maybe we should open it up to the audience. Do we have any questions out there that folks want to throw in? Let's get the microphone first.
Yeah, okay, it's on. I was just wondering what role you think search engines have in propagating bullying, harassment. Did you read that book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed?
No, but I'm sure that sounds really good.
It's pretty great, and it talks about online harassment a lot. And
Oh, cool.
PR firms that basically launch do-gooder stories on people who have been.
Oh yeah, that's it's like SEO bolstering is what that's called.
Yeah. So I mean, is there a strategy, I guess, in that search engines could take in preventing propagating online harassment?
I mean, I think so. I think it's less search engine. I think it's more company based. So I think, for instance, Google only recently in the past year or so started to acknowledge revenge porn as an actual thing, and then has taken steps to removing images. I think that there's a lot that companies can do. I'm remiss, or I don't necessarily want to say that like we should start with the search engine, primarily because in something like Google, I do think users should be able to search for whatever they want to search for. And I don't think it's necessarily up to a company to police that. I do think, though, Google should be a lot more accessible towards victims of online harassment or anyone that's been a victim of like identity theft. And I think that they could do a better job of having like with Chase Bank's fraud department, it's actually pretty accessible. The reason banks have that is not because they care about fraud, it's because they care if you go somewhere else. But I think there could be a push around like, hey, like this thing happened, here's the evidence of it, and like letting someone know it's not going to an email that no one will ever read. And then like conversely, it doesn't result in a user having to get a lawyer and then do a DCMA takedown, so Digital Copyright Millennium Act takedown of an image, meaning like you start to pull in copyright law around that, and sort of you start to argue ownership over an image of like revenge porn. So I think it's more holding companies accountable for the fact that the systems that they've designed for human interaction, for communication, for facilitation of communication, are now encompassing all forms of human interaction, including fights, including jealousy, including anger. And that's actually, I think, left out of the design process a lot. When people start to design things, I think about a lot of the positive ways the thing will be used, but not the way of which it will be misused. And I think that's, as designers and as design researchers, that's something that we should be really talking about in our work now, that as we live our lives online, that also means all aspects of our lives. So TLDR, like I think Google should have some fantastic hotline to where you could say like, I'm clearly being harassed here, and then here's further proof of like this person doing this. Like you should actually remove this from the front page.
It reminds me of what evolution we've had in terms of online platforms in general. I think in like the late 90s, early 2000s, like a big marker of success for some online platform was that it was started to be used for porn. And that was like an indication that like it was used enough that it was working. And so now we're at the point where so many of us are online that it needs to be regulated more like public space as opposed to just like, when is it taking off?
Totally. That's something actually I talked about before the talk is, so like all these companies are private companies, but we exist on them the way we would exist in public spaces like a park, like we're hosting our conversations, but it's really more akin to like being in a barred space like a cafe. Like in a cafe, you still have to adhere to whatever rules exist in the city or state that you're in, and then on top of it, they can add rules like no shirt, no shoes, no service, but they can't deny you service for being of a different color or of a different gender. But what I think is like missing on these platforms is also this idea that they can enact like a policy of if you're rowdy or if you're yelling at our servers, we can throw you out and we reserve the right to refuse service. And most cafes have that, but they can't refuse service based off of like, again, like gender, age. They can't discriminate based off certain factors. So I think that there could be a push, and there should be, specifically because you're in a private company's space.
Another question?
I'm older than time here, and I've been online virtually every day since 1981. First time on ARPANET back in '79.
That's amazing.
But one of the things I'd suggest to you in your research is take a look at some of the earliest conferencing conferencing software, because interestingly, I think they were the most powerful, allowed the most user control, and also enabled communities to stay together. My personal favorite was Participate on the old Source network. It then migrated to CompuServe when the Source was bought up by CompuServe. And there is still a participate group. Party still exists on some small systems, Allegheny College or something, and some corporate sites. But there's still the original party group from the early 80s on Facebook today as X Party. And we're still in touch. It was that robust. But what it enabled you to do that none of the newer programs do was define, you could start a conference on a particular topic, and you could define with each, you gave permission for each person to enter that space, and you could define what they could do on it. Did they have read-only status? Did they have read and write status? Could they vote? And there were many, many powerful powerful commands that simply don't exist on, you could have conference, you could have a topic and subtopics, you could allow other people to branch or only you to branch, and so on and so forth. And I'll say one more thing, is that I keep all my things public, and I have only 2 rules, and they're the 2 rules for myself. Before I hit the send button, if it's too private to go out to the world, I simply don't put it online, period. Not in email, not in tweets, not in any other kind of digital communication. That's where the really private stuff goes. And the second thing is, if somebody attacks me, they never get a response. I stop at level 1, and basically it fizzles out almost every flame war. And it's hard not to jump in and defend yourself, or to wait for your friends. I'd sometimes send a private message to friends and say, stop.
Right.
Please stop. It usually works.
Well, one thing I do like about that, though, is, so like, again, like, there's also just different user needs within that. So I'm definitely going to look into the older conferencing models. That sounds fantastic. But one thing, too, to keep in mind around online harassment, though, there are times where there are these instances called dogpiling. So earlier in the year, I got retweeted by Anita Sarkeesian, and it was a feminist tweet, and I had to block over 60 accounts in 2 days. But it was just like this onslaught of pretty immediately of people responding, and there's no way to just sort of mute the conversation. It was like every time I opened my mentions, it was just like all of these responses, and it was the tweet itself was retweeted over 1,000 times. And it was one of these instances of like, it would have been nice to have muted that, just to see, like, I think it was at least probably 150 responses were like, you're a dumb bitch. And there's also instances too, I think, where when you start to look at moments of things going viral or memes in particular around tweets, where having the ability to just turn, like, for yourself to not even see it, to turn a thread off or to make something unshareable, does actually alleviate like stress in a situation. Because I was super stressed out, and a lot of the women that I interviewed around being victims of Gamergate, there were times where it was just like, there was no way to sort of step away other than to physically step away from Twitter for a couple days and like let it die down. But there was no way to, like, even once you thought the tweet's life had been over, to really, really know. There's no way to actually like flip a switch.
But not caring flips it. It really does.
Well, but it's not so much that.
It worked for everybody.
Right, but that's also what I'm saying, is that for some people, when like that doesn't work to throw an extreme instance out there, like whenever Zoe Quinn posts something, the amount of feedback she gets, like, not caring is not possible for her. She doesn't care, but it's actually the stress of like seeing all of your mentions fill up and then not being able to like use a communication tool to communicate. Like, I think that's where a lot of the basis of this comes from, is the ability to sort of choose. So like, if you are in a moment of being, it's called dogpiling, maybe even having there be a notification to other users of like, this tweet is turned off, or to your friends, I've muted this tweet, or even things of like Twitter used to do this a lot, where if you tweeted too much, the whale would pop up and it was like, oh, you're in Twitter jail for like an hour because we think you're a bot. But even having that element come back could be really useful in this case.
But
Did Twitter think you were a bot often?
It's
Yes.
another version of what the phone company always said to do with an obscene phone call.
Right,
Yeah.
right, but
Okay, but the issue we're addressing here is that we've gone from spaces that feel like conversation and then resonate to media.
yeah.
And so what we're getting is a volume of responses, actually media volume. And a lot of these systems don't actually, the power of them is in that, and then there's also the trouble of the harassment that can also be
Right.
done that way.
And I think a bigger thing is also just like filtering. So like the way I use Twitter and the way you use Twitter and the way Ida uses Twitter, the way maybe Molly uses Twitter or Facebook or Instagram may be radically different, but it's acknowledging as designers that that's true. Like the way of which we all sit in this room, we'll use an object, we'll use it 1,000 different ways. And the way of which we design conversation connections at Watson, the thing we always laugh about is once it goes live is the user, we've tested the conversation structures 1,000 ways, and when the user is going to break it in 1,001 ways. And that's just the way we use things. And that's the fascinating part about designing is learning like I was really wrong.
Do we have another question from the audience?
I think that what you mentioned, like you have a lot of great ideas how to improve social media, but in the end it's a political issue. So I guess one thing is that do you think that most people who use those media are even literate enough to, or even have the power to change it? And kind of like, what does it take to make
Right.
Facebook change their privacy policies, or Twitter?
So to be honest, the reason I speak is it actually helps. I met one of the original engineers of Twitter at a talk I gave at Data and Society. He's offered to put me in touch with the engineering team as a consultant. So like that causes change. Or the fact that Ania Sarkeesian speaks, or like Catherine Cross or Zoe Quinn, very specific key actors who were targeted by Gamergate, and the fact that they have suggestions, I think that does sort of start to initiate change at a large scale. I remember briefly talking to Anita before she spoke at the Game Center that like she, I think just from her and Zoe Quinn like talking to Twitter, they started to enact filtering for verified users. Granted, that doesn't help for most of us in this room unless we're verified, which right now tends to be like a lot of journalists. But like, I guess what I'm sort of taking from your talk is like it is political, but it's also something that is being talked about in social media and within these corporations. They just are very slow and careful about the changes they make. Sometimes I think too slow, but like they are listening in more ways than one, with that being a pun, metaphor, and essay.
I think we have a question here.
I was wondering in your research if you came across mother-daughter duos or like a family situation, and how that conversation is happening offline about what's appropriate behavior, what's not appropriate behavior.
Right.
And what parents are trying to teach their kids, or parents have taken up the
Right.
fight.
So I actually just started writing a tech column for Rookie Magazine around technology and gaming. And so that's one conversation we've started to have is how do we talk, Rookie Magazine's geared towards middle and high school students, mainly females. And I have a 15-year-old stepsister. So it's something where like, that's a lot of the conversations we sort of get into is like, how do you start training children at a very young age who have access to these tools, what it means. And a lot of that, I think that's probably gonna be the next step in my research is how do you start defining like age-appropriate tools, or rather like UI implementations that will teach like permeability as well as a pervasiveness of information. Because when you're really young, it's really hard to actually have a grasping of like this picture you took as a joke, you know, like exists. But it's something where I think there needs to be a lot of research done, because I don't, like Dana Boyd does really amazing stuff with teens and social media, but she's sort of started to move away from that. But I think like they use it in such a different way. And I think a lot of that then it's like, it's maybe, again, time for like Instagram as an example. If your main follower base is like 15-year-olds who are posting specific kinds of pictures, or an even better example, Twitter with people accidentally posting debit card information, like where does that fall legally to you? And is it your job as the company to like protect users from themselves? And I would say yes, But it's like a philosophical conversation to have of then how do you reflect that in UI, or how do you reflect that in like an algorithm? Like, should you pull out the word selfie, or have image recognition if like a girl that's 15 is posting something you think is risque? Like, Instagram gets into a lot of trouble with this with reporting, but then you start to get into what is risque, why are you allowed to deem what is appropriate? Where something like debit card, that's a pretty clean-cut scenario of like, you shouldn't do that. Credit card fraud, like, we'll just make it to where you can't do that. But that's like a very cut and dry scenario. But I think that's, yeah, I mean, I've started to expand into that, but I think the bigger issue is you end up having a generation gap depending upon what mother-daughter duo you're talking to, and how well do the parents themselves even understand privacy in social networks.
Let's have one more question, and then we can take the conversation.
Yeah, I'll be around for drinks if you guys want to chat.
Hi, thank you. I had one question for you. I was wondering if you found instances of the way online interaction or spaces, instances where that sort of interaction has affected human behavior. And I'm interested in what happens when that interaction comes full circle from our own interaction up to shaping online spaces, and then back to the conversations we might have in person.
Well, I'm going to need you to clarify in a second, but do you mean like you've met someone online, you've met offline, then you go back online, or do you mean like you and I start talking online and then our conversation goes offline, then goes back online?
It's more so how does the way that interaction is structured online, such as in terms of upvoting, downvoting, liking, even the way that conversations through messages are structured, do you find that comes back full circle and then affects the way we interact with one another?
Well, we've already found she talks to some people like robots now.
Yeah.
Hello, I am a robot.
Sort of, and yes and no. I think it depends. I think the bigger issue, or what needs to be unpacked here, is that there's a multitude of social interactions and social relationships we have to each other, and oftentimes social media sort of streamlines that. So like I will be really candid with a handful of people in this room because I know them outside of this room, but I'll be less candid with you, but you are privy to those candid conversations on Twitter. Like if you were to see me tweet at Ida versus then you ask me a question, the structure of the language of what I'm using would be different. And it would maintain that way. I may be jokier on Twitter because it's a place where you see things that feel less buttoned up, like misspellings are there, or I don't type in caps, or I shorten U to just the letter U. Those are things that sort of generate and engender this idea of like a very casual conversation, even though like I may actually be very reserved. And so I think oftentimes then, like, let's say it's a stranger to stranger relationship, one stranger may actually view it as much more personal than it is. And then that gets reflected into like potential awkwardness or like strange interaction into a casual face-to-face conversation that then maybe gets reflected into, I don't know, harassment if we're going to go down that user scenario, or maybe it gets resulted like it's awkward at first and then they're like awkward online but fine, right? I think the bigger issue is like with the starting point is because there's a lack of voice heard and volume and body language. It's easy to interpret the written word as a variety of different things, just also based off of small instances of vernacular misspellings, casual verbiage, things like that.
Well, thanks everybody for being here. I think there were a couple things I was supposed to say to wrap this up, but I've forgotten what they are.
Yeah, well, everybody
Drinks.
Join us for drinks. But first, another round of applause for Caroline's.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
And thank you, Zach.
Thanks, Ida.